Hello and welcome back to the worst War Machine channel on the internet. I'm Malorian and this is Malorian Weekly. Now we're going to be continuing our series, our master series on the win conditions. Last week we talked about assassination, and to be honest, I had a few locals that were kind of poking fun at me because assassination isn't normally my go-to thing. Whereas this week we're talking about one of my favorites, which is scenario, the win condition scenario. The whole idea of this series is that after we cover the four main win conditions, if you can kind of master these four, you're just a better player. So really, again, trying to do that, just, giving this back and developing players. But as I said today, our real focus is going to be on mastering scenario wins. So I think the very first thing that we want to be covering is, what does it mean to be playing scenario? What are we doing when we're trying to be winning by scenario? And I find that playing by scenario is one of the weirdest things you can go for, because it's not what most games would be looking for, right? Typically, when you're going into something, attrition that we're going to be talking about next week feels more normal, right? If you're coming from chess or something else, I'm going into this game trying to destroy you. I want to kill more of you than you kill of me. Or maybe even assassination, where, okay, I'm going to try and kill your leader. Okay, those things kind of make sense from like a game mind idea. But this is getting down to the heart of, no, nothing else matters. Everything else is a resource. As long as I achieve my scenario victory, that's all that matters. And so what you'll find is that a lot of players don't tend towards scenario in the beginning. It's something that it kind of usually comes on later. If nothing else, maybe sometimes there'll be a thing where these other attrition players might then lean to scenario to finish off a game. And that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about how you can kind of like kill things and when there's not much else, then go for the scenario. This is more like, no, I'm going to go into this game and I'm going to win this by scenario. So with that, let's get into it. War Machine, and the way that their scenarios work is that you get control points. And if you get a certain number of control points, boom, you win. It doesn't matter how much of your army was lost, how much of your time was left, as long as you have, 1 second left and you have something there to say that your caster's still alive. Hooray! I got the scenario and I won. Now, there's been some changes over time, but currently the way it works is that you need to be having 5 more control points than your opponent. This is very different from some of the old ways where we used to just need just a certain number like 5. Now you need to be having 5 more. And you can score these either by your troops going and taking the circle zones, your jacks and battle engines taking the round zones, the rectangle zones, the flags being taken by solos, and then your casters can be taking any of them. And so the main thing with this new system that they have right now is understanding what can take what. Now, I didn't want to go too far in depth on how the current scenario pack works, because this scenario pack is going to be changing all the time. This has been going through the ways that you need to be winning, the control points, the scenarios, even very, very different in the way these things work. And those are critical to the ways that you need to be winning on scenario. Whereas, say, last week we talked about with assassination that you have to really develop your list, and that's really the first spot you should be going to, is to try and think of a list of how it's going to be killing things. When it comes to scenario, the very first thing that you really have to study is that scenario package and understanding what you'll need to do in order to make this happen. Looking at the package and even kind of understanding like, okay, what are the ways that you score? Oh, in this scenario package, only certain types of units and solos and jacks and battle engines can score certain things. Well, okay, I now want to look at what the different scenarios are and what's the ratio. How many of these missions have circle zones, rectangles, how many flags are out there, and then thinking about when I'm going to be making my list after, it has to have something that can address this. If I want to be winning by scenario, but at the same time I don't have the pieces I need to score the scenario, that's obviously a very big problem. Coming from our old scenario pack to this one, there's a lot of people that would just be like, well, I got a lot of infantry, or I have a whole bunch of jacks, and then they kind of realize after, like, ooh, if I want to be doing scenario, I need a bits of each of both of these so I can be scoring all these different things. So that's very important. Really study that scenario package in depth and really understanding how you're going to be scoring it and what pieces you need to take to actually do that. And that's just the composition, like percentages, right? We haven't even really gone to like the plan of how you're actually going to try and win by that scenario. It's already just kind of thinking about like, what are my ratios going to have to be in order to actually achieve this type of scenario victory? Other little details can also be very important, right? Like, how do you contest? When do you score? Simple things like, kill box, and the whole idea that maybe kill box could be adding or minusing to this, right? That's all these little details are something you need to be keeping in mind. So the very first step when you want to be mastering scenario is read that scenario package and know it inside and out, because you cannot be at a spot where you give up a point or anything like that, because it's going to be crucial every single turn. Now, once that's done, once you understand how you can win by a scenario, next you have to be really focused on how you're going to be going about it. And there's lots of different ways. I would say the very first way you should be thinking about when it comes to going for a scenario is going to be kind of a aggressive attrition scenario. So it's not the attrition that we're going to be talking about next week where, I want to be killing more than I'm losing, but the idea is going to be that for me to score these zones and these flags, they need to be clear of enemy. So I'm going to be taking elements in my force that's going to be killing what's there to get them out, and I'm going to score those points. And then maybe you'll come back, I'm going to try contesting, and then boom, I'm going to clear these out again. That's the first way that you might be trying to go about this. The second way that you might want to be trying to go about this is going to be more so board control. Now, when it comes to board control, what I really mean by that is that if you think of your 4x4 square, you want to be controlling the majority of that square so that you're controlling the majority of the scenario elements. If you are an army that can go first, that can be going fast and claiming a lot of this board, well, by doing that, you can then control these elements, right? For them to actually get in there to try and score them or even to contest them, they have to fight through your front lines to basically get to this area here. So that's really a very big thing to understand, is just the fact that you can be trying to be fast and getting up there and just trying to control the board. Now, board control can also be seen in some other ways as well, right? Sometimes board control might be in more denial. So maybe another way to think about it is in a way where you can be saying, hey, I maybe have a feat that says you can't move or you're slow, or maybe I have spells that move you away. That's kind of a more denial type thing. It's not so much that you are drawing the line and this is going to be that I have claimed this part of the board, but this is more so, no, you got somewhere around here, now go away. Or I bet you really want to come over here, but no, I'm going to stop you and you just can't really move at all. And really kind of claiming these things that way. Another way that we can really be talking about these scenario pieces as well is kind of the contesting and jamming. Now, what I really mean by that is that it's one thing for me to score, but it doesn't really matter how much I score if you're scoring as well. So I have to be in a spot where I'm going to be shutting down your way of getting points while maximizing my own. And that's something that also got a really lot more importance from the last scenario thing. And that's why I said it's such importance to be looking at that first, because under the old system where say you only need to get 5 points, I don't really care if you get a couple of points, as long as I get to 5 first. Now that we're in a world where you need to be having 5 more, every point that I deny you getting is basically like me scoring. And that's really an important thing to think about. It's really easy in the very beginning to be like, oh, okay, you can score your 1 point. It doesn't really matter. It's a long ways off of 5. But at the same time, because it's that difference, them scoring that 1 is like you not scoring it. And so that's extremely important in the end when you're trying to close out that game. And so if you're going to be doing that, if you're going to be elements are going to be stopping them, then you need to have fast elements, elements, they're evasive, or whatever it is, to try and get in there and try and contest some pieces. Maybe it's fast, like as a one-time thing, like run in there and I'm going to contest for this turn. Or maybe it's something that's going to get in there and it's going to like hold place and be like, okay, you can't really get rid of me, so you're going to have a hard time clearing this out and scoring it. And that's kind of where like jamming might come in. That's kind of like the thing where I'm just going to be throwing all the stuff in your face, and then it's going to be just there to be contesting. And then a lot of things you're going to find is start overlapping, right? Like if I have things I'm going to throw in your face and now you can't come forward, well, that's also that other parts of board control where I'm saying I'm making a line. And so what you're going to find is that when you really want to be getting into these type of scenario type plays, you want to be thinking of these different ways to be going about that scenario victory. But also just the idea that you probably want to be having all of them. I mean, you can try going more in one way or more in the other, but the more that you have pieces of all of them, probably the better. And I'd say the real reason for that is that sometimes when you're trying to win by scenario, you're going to find spots where your opponent's going to kind of shut these things down, right? If really what you're going for is something that's going to say, hey, I'm going to be fast, I'm going to get up there, and I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to control things, and then your opponent goes first, and they take the table, well, what do? Do you just going to lose this game? Or what if they have like a colossal? And the colossal is going to get into the zone and then it's going to sit there and be like, oh, well, I guess I can't score that zone now. Or maybe you plan to like push things around and use your magic, but now they have a rule where they can't be pushed or whatever it is that counters what you're trying to do. Well, okay, now I'm in trouble. So what you're going to kind of find is much like when we were talking about with assassination, that you have to kind of read the field and see what type of things that you need to have the locks and keys for type thing. It's going to be the same thing when you're trying to be building your scenario list. You have to be looking out there and trying to think of like on a gauge, I have only so many points. So how much of this am I going to be putting into board control? How much am I going to be putting into this where I can be clearing out zones, that I can be manipulating things, contesting, and really trying to find that right balance based on the scenario package that you already studied and then the meta that you're trying to play into. And that can be a very difficult thing to do, right? You might do your best, run into an army that it's just not going to work against, but hey, that's going to be the same thing for all these win conditions. You could have done your best to find the best assassination caster and then run into like, oh, they're behind a house because this table just has a couple of houses and I just can't really deal with that. So these things might come up. The next thing I want to say is, so we've gone in, we've studied our scenario package, we've made our list, trying to figure out which way of trying to win by scenario we're going for, trying to figure out those little dials and how much of each of those we're going to be taking. Now, next thing is going to come up is when you actually play that game and when you're actually going to be facing who you're going to be up against. And the first thing you're going to be looking at is really that list chicken and the table. So as soon as this comes up and I'm looking at this, I have to be saying, for this table that's going to be having the scenario down and the terrain around it, how is this going to be affecting my chances on winning on scenario? And so again, if you took something that had a lot more infantry, you're hoping to see a scenario that has a lot more circles. Or if you have a lot of solos, you're hoping to see a lot of flags, stuff like that. That might already be trying to lean you between one way or another with your lists for going for this. We don't want to get into too much of list chicken stuff, but something to think about. Even terrain can be extremely important for your scenario. A good example here is whereas for assassination, they didn't want them to have, say, like a wall to give them cover or building or forest to just absolutely hide behind. That would be bad for that. When it comes to scenario, you're looking for movement on the board and access to get to things. A good example here is that maybe a flag is going to be on the other side of a building so that a solo can sit on it and then just be scoring it really easy. However, you might be trying to find points where, okay, you might have that building there, but based on like the 4 inches, I can be hiding on this other side of the building here and be contesting it in a very awkward spot that you'd have to kind of go around to get there. Or maybe I'm trying to control the board, and if I put you over there, there's a lot of rubble and buildings and stuff that if I can clog up these small points, you just can't really get through to get to the rest of the board and can contest my things. So now you're actually looking for those things on the table as opposed to what can my opponent hide behind to stop my assassination? Also, you'll be looking at your opponent's lists and say like, okay, I brought these answers, these keys to go to these different locks. What do they have? Like some big things you might be looking for here is, they have those high armor things that are quick that might be able to get into a table and just sit there? Do they have a lot of things that are going to be allowing them to be going first? Do they have flying models that can just fly over your lines and contest things? Do they have incorporeal? If I'm going to be basing my jam on having lots of infantry, that they have the anti-infantry to clear it out of their way, right? Things like this you have to really look at to see whether your list is actually going to be able to do this. It's kind of the thing whereas assassination, we were talking about how you have to be good at the math and understand like, what is my odds of assassination? The problem is that math, when it comes to scenario, there's way too many X factors. There's way too many other things to think about. So you can't really walk away and be like, oh yeah, I had a 37 chance of scenario. It's just not the way that the math works. However, you can have a general feel for it by looking at it and seeing like, okay, they have this many outs and ways that they can be going and trying to break through my line, counter score, whatever it is. And so it's going to be easier or harder to try and win this game on scenario based on the list, based on the scenario, based on the terrain. Now, when it comes to the actual game and when you're going to be playing it, the biggest thing you have to be focusing on there is very specifically what the plan is going to be and what models need to go where. So the last thing you want to do is have like, oh, I have this rectangle zone over here where something's going to be holding back and I didn't put anything back there. And then now partway through the game, I'm trying to awkwardly put my aggressive jack back in this defensive zone because I didn't really plan for what was going to be going there. Again, this is probably pre-work you should have done from the very beginning, knowing that if I get this scenario, this is where these different pieces are supposed to be going. But now this is where the rubber meets the road. And now you definitely have to deploy correctly and execute correctly to get these pieces to where they need to go. Because one of the things you're going to find is that you can very quickly get yourself in trouble in here. As you're fighting and trying to go for a scenario, your opponent is trying to go for their own win condition. So maybe they're trying to assassinate your caster, maybe they're trying to win on attrition, and maybe they're trying to win by a scenario themselves. But the more time that you give them, the better the chance that they're actually going to pull off their win condition. So you need to get that scenario win ASAP, especially if you're looking at something like playing against an attrition player where turn after turn, you're going to have fewer pieces in order to try and score on scenario. And so the longer the game goes, the less of a chance you have for actually winning on scenario. So with that being said, okay, that's great. We're going to go and deploy our pieces wherever they need to be. We need to go and execute our plan as we need. But as well with that, we need to be eyeing to see what our opponent is doing. What is our opponent trying to be sending their pieces? And they might have a different game plan, right? I'm sending this here because this is good at killing that. And they're thinking in an assassination or attrition mindset. However, you're thinking more of this on a scenario mindset. You want to be saying, okay, in this area where this can be scored by this, what are they having to contest? Where does it look like they're going to be trying to score themselves that I need to be stopping them? Maybe what I need to be doing is if they really want to be scoring with this solo, I need to kill it. I might have the ability to kill this jack, but I would rather kill this solo because that's what's going to be scoring a point and that's what's going to be mattering more. You have to be looking for those things, and maybe even just the ebb of flow where it looks like, wow, they're really focusing on this flank. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kind of just like trap them there on that side, and I'm going to score on the other side as fast as I can, knowing that I'm going to get my butt kicked, but if I can just stall them long enough, I can be winning over here. So understanding that flow of where the models are going and where you can actually score, incredibly important. Now, I think a big part of this as well might be something like baiting and something where you're trying to get models to go where you want them to be. Now, some of the ways you might be trying to do this is maybe you're going to be zooming up with your models so that, sure, normally you wouldn't want to be going so fast so that your opponent can be shooting at you. But in this case here, if their Colossal walks up and shoots, that distance compared to them running is worth it in order to keep them out of zones. If you're trying to keep some things wide so that if they go and attack you, they're not going to be in the zone there to contest. That's the type of thing you might be trying to look for to get them out of position. Board control in those scenarios and those zones on the table are the utmost of importance, and trying to control the movement around that is important. So whether you can just see that they're not going there or whether you need to just bait them away are definitely things you might want to look at. I remember one tournament where I actually baited a Colossal out of the zone with my Colossal. Did it suck that I lost my huge biggest piece? Yes, but I scored that zone because the Colossal left it. And so these might be more like gotchas, but it's another thing too where you can be using it to your advantage later when you're a master of most of these, where you can be threatening scenario and say like, hey, you can go after this, but if you don't, okay, I'll be in a better spot for something else. So you can have your things open once you're a master of most of these. I think the next thing you want to be really thinking about for this is deciding how hard you have to be pushing and how fast. Now, once you have this plan, once you're executing it, once you're watching the flow of the board and trying to bait things and trying to get points, there's going to be decision points of where how many points do you want to be scoring per turn. Now, on one side, you might just say like, well, this is obvious. I want to be scoring as many points as I can. Go, go, go. I want to be winning this game. However, there's some counters to that. The first one being is that if you really kind of show your cards early and be like, boom, I'm going for all the scenario, that's when they're going to be locking down scenario. So for example, if I have an opportunity where I can be either scoring early in the game, let's say 1 or 2 control points, and I decide like I'm going to go for the 2, well, my opponent might start getting worried. Or let's say I went for 3, whatever it is, my opponent might now decide like, ooh, scenario is a problem, so now I'm going to be specifically locking things down. Whereas if I start up and just do like a random 1 point, they might now go still on with their assassination plan. They're not too much worried, but I'm now going into another turn where I don't need 5 to win anymore. I just need 4 because I'm already ahead. Or maybe I'll see that, geez, this attrition battle is really going against me. I need to be going as fast as possible. It's not a thing about a trickery or anything like that. I just need to be going because they're going to see what's going on here and they're just going to be killing me regardless. I think another thing you could be thinking about too when it comes to scenario is that understanding that you are trading resources to be scoring these points. I mean, a lot of times it's not like your opponent is just sitting in the back and watching you score and win the game. They're doing their own things too. And so for you to be putting things in those places, you're probably putting them in danger and they're probably losing them. And so if it means that you're going to be scoring less points, however, you're holding enough back that you're threatening your opponent and you can score more later, that could be the right way to go. I mean, a good example is maybe an opportunity where, okay, I can push hard right now and get 3 points, but then I'm going to lose all my solos. This unit's going to be wiped out. And then next turn, I won't be able to score anything. Or maybe I'm going to grab these 2, hold this in reserve, and now because I have forces in reserve, they can't really dedicate as much to me to try and go for attrition, and then I can explode next turn to try and get those last points to close out the game. And I think that's something that you might want to be getting your mind to. When it comes to the idea of scenario, again, it might seem to you that you want to be like, go, go, go. I have to get those points as fast as I can. Okay, I got my 5, I win type thing. However, you always have to know that every time you go and push to that, like I said, there'll be the attrition crackback. So what you're really looking for is that explosive finish where you can get all the points you need at the very end and then be able to win that way. So that it really doesn't matter what they do because the game's kind of already over. This might also be in a spot here too where you have to be doing the math going both ways. The math of, okay, I can go in there and explode and take these points might be one thing, but you're thinking about only your turn. When it comes to scenario, you need to be thinking about both turns because you're going to be scoring on both of these. The idea that I might be able to hold back and only score 2 points, but now I'm defensively contesting these and I'll be scoring this one as well or whatever one, you know, because I have this defensive line could be something more to think about. Or maybe if there's a good spot where I can explode and get all over you, and it's like, well, I'm only going to get a couple of points because that's all I can get, which is not enough to win the game. But because you're held back because I jammed you so well, kept you away from getting to these pieces, well, now I'm also going to score on your turn. And wow, that basically just means I win the game. That's probably one of the more common ways I see you winning against newer players, is the type of thing where you score a couple of points, they don't contest enough, you go up another one on their turn, and it's like, oh, now I just need to score 2 on this turn to win? Oh, well, okay, this one's automatic, score this one, off I go. And I think that's where you really get into that spot where I want to stress that you can feel like it's okay to throw models away, right? If it's going to mean that you're going to be scoring these pieces, these scenario points, these control points, that's the main thing. That's what you're trying to get after. So if I lose this entire unit, but I keep you over there, that's fine because I'm going to be scoring these pieces. If I run this jack into your face and, hey, you do your thing, you do your hermit, you go up and you smash my jack, that's okay because you're still over there and my scenario stuff is over there, or is over here rather, and I'm just scoring it. So these are all things you need to be looking for, all very important things to be considering. So I think then what we're looking at is we know that, okay, we have a list that we had to make right based on what we saw in our scenario pack. We had to think about it very carefully when we saw what their lists were, what the scenario was, what the terrain was. We had to make sure that we executed it correctly. And then when it got into the game, we had to be very careful to be always watching the ebb and flow, who's going where can I score, how hard do I push? Am I going to be pushing too hard and not be able to score on other turns? Or can I push so hard that they can't come back and I'm going to be scoring on my turn, their turn, and then just finish the game on my turn as well? Last thing to talk about scenario is that sometimes you can win scenario by not winning scenario. And what I mean by that is specifically with this one right now that we're having with this scenario pack, the Steamroller pack, is that when you're done turn 7, whoever has the most control points wins. And so you can almost be holding off to then. If you can just stay ahead, I don't need to have 5 more. I don't need to be doing any of that. I just need to be having more than you. Now, the problem is here, if you're going to be going for that turn 7 scenario win, is that you have to have the ability to last that long. And so whereas before we were talking about things like you can sacrifice, throw, go. I don't care if I lose things. If I'm planning to last a full 7 turns, that might not be possible. And if that's the type of game that I'm going to be playing, I look at my opponent and I say, there is going to be no way I'm going to get 5 more points than my opponent, but I could probably stay 1 ahead. That's something where I want to start playing cagey and being very careful to every single turn, score whatever I can and contest whatever I can. And that's again stressing as much as possible that contesting a scenario piece is the same thing as scoring a scenario piece. And then from that is your win condition, right? That's what you're looking to win by is scenario, but I'm not going crazy all out. I might be holding a little bit more back, trying to take whatever I can, and really just stalling until I get to that turn 7. Maybe turn 6, maybe on turn 7, that's where I'm going crazy and trying to block things out, and that's when I can really be using up my resources. But it's not like some of the other scenario plans where turn 2, turn 3, I'm going all out and trying to take as much as I can. So that is another thing to be considering, the fact that you can be winning on turn 7 with just being ahead, but it's not something that you want to be thinking about too late, right? If you're in a spot where it's now turn 5, your gambit has been failed, and you're now down on attrition so hard that you don't really have anything left, it's too late to make that turn 7 play. That's something that you have to be thinking about on turn 1, probably even more so on deployments, probably even more so when you're looking at the list, the idea that that's the game plan you're going to need to be going for. So that type of insight to what your opponent is playing, how the game will actually flow, incredibly important. Being able to read your opponent, incredibly important to know what they're going to be going for and how hard you can push. So there you go. That is our master class on winning on scenario. There are so many great scenario casters out there, and to me, I kind of really hope that this is something that Privateer Press will be encouraging even more. It's something where I feel that in older scenario packs, Steamroller packs, scenario was a lot stronger and a lot easier to win by, and now it's a lot more difficult, and you have to be a little bit more careful unless you're going for that tricky turn 7. That's something that we never had before. So there you go. Thanks for watching. If I missed anything, please post it down below. We can always chat about there, and otherwise, we'll catch you later. Bye.